Today we're going to talk about the WD-45 Allis-Chalmers is what we're going to be rebuilding today. It just also pertains to the WC, the WF, and the WD. The one we're working on today is the WD-45, but everything we do today will pertain to your tractor.
To get started, we're going to be draining the fluids from the engine, the water out of the radiator, the oil out of the engine, and then taking the hoods off.
We're starting to drain the fluids on the tractor. We got the radiator drained into a pail, and we pulled the plug on the oil pan. In this particular tractor, might be what you're going to see, the oil is white. It's got antifreeze in the crankcase oil. So when we start tearing this tractor down, we're going to be looking for possibly a blown head gasket, a sleeve that's leaking in the engine block, anything else we can find, hopefully not a cracked block. But that's what we're going to be looking for when we take this tractor apart, is why that oil has got so much antifreeze on it. Herb and Guy have got the hood all loose on top. We are ready to take the hood off the tractor. They have some bolts that run down the side right here to hold this side on. That's pretty tricky on these. The muffler has one bolt that goes through it there that pushes on the muffler and holds it on tight. I have that off. Kirby, get the other side, please. And then we got the bolts out of the front of the hood. Guy just took the oil bath air cleaner off, and you can just take the hood right off the front and gets us out to our next step.
Dan and Herb have got the radiator loose. There's two studs that come up in from the bottom of the radiator. They're 3/4, and they're going to take this radiator off. They got to get the radiator hoses loose. And the shroud and the radiator will come right off the front. While they were doing that, I took 4 bolts out of the back of the air cleaner here, and we're going to take that off. It just makes a little easier access to the back of the motor.
We're ready to take the manifold off. Dan's worked on taking the studs loose and the nuts off them. Make sure you spray some penetrating oil on them. Try to get those loose without breaking them. Also, he disconnected the linkages from the choke and all. When you take this off, it's a good time to inspect it to get an idea of what you might need as far as the gaskets, and also if the manifolds burn out on the back side, you're going to keep an eye on that and see what you need to do. Guy's worked on getting the generator loose here, and he's took the regulator off with it and just disconnected the wires from the regulator and unbolted that and just took it right out. So we've got that part cleared off, and now we'll work on the other side, getting the linkage off and things ready to pull the engine out.
Around to the other side of the tractor now. I'm going to take the tappet cover off. Got 4 bolts or 4 nuts on top to take off. And while I'm struggling with that, Herb's got a project he's working on.
I'm going to pull the distributor out and take off the wires to the coil and also the governor linkage. There's 2 9/16" bolts here on the bottom of the distributor. You got to loosen up. Little clips. And take those off, pull the distributor out. Disconnect the wires, the coil on it, and hood wires.
While they're doing that, I'll see if I can get this water pump off here. You got a milky oil up there.
Terrible. Your governor linkage has a cotter pin here in the front. You got to take that out, and then on the back side, there's a little nut, kind of adjuster for the linkage. Loosen this nut up, and then you can slide your governor linkage right out and take this nut thing out and hold it in a good place. Keep that.
We're going to be ready to take this water pump off. There's a 3rd bolt underneath down here that we had to turn out with a wrench all the way. It's too close to get a socket onto it, and we're ready to see if this thing will come off. Now it seems to be stuck to the box pretty good.
As you take things apart, make sure you put your bolts in a can or something like that to keep track of them so you can lose them when you get ready to put it all back together. And keep an idea on what parts you might need and gaskets and hoses as you go along too, so you know can build a list of things you need as you go and get parts.
We've got the tab cover off the top of the engine. Now we got to take the rocker assembly and the push rods and everything out. There's 4 bolts that hold it down, and they're really long. So you got a lot of threads here to go down.
There's also an oil tube here. You need to get this little connection loose here so you get this oil tube loose. Pull that off.
Little shield comes off first. And you should be able to lift the rocker straight off. Hopefully your oil won't look as bad as it does in this one. Then after that point, now we're ready to take all the head bolts off. They're all a row of them here and a row of them along here. These ones up here, you'll have to use a wrench to get these ones off. The socket won't fit in there, and the rest of them we can get off of the socket.
We've loosened up all the head bolts. They all got to come out. Let that one come out. And put this back there. This goes on with 2 nuts, and they're captured down under there, so you have to take them off with a wrench. But this little water manifold has to come off before the head will come off. The rest of the bolts out of there.
Also on this side, there's an oil tube you want to make sure you get off, loosen that up, get that out of the way. And then there's 3 smaller studs or bolts, nuts on this side that you need to take off. So you can get this side out loose.
With the 2 studs that the water manifold was held on with, it's extremely tight. So we drove in some wedges. We drove a screwdriver in here to try loosening it up off the wedges. We have not had good luck getting it off yet. But Guy's got a bar here. We're going to try to lift it up over the studs. If it weren't for them studs, you got it. You got it here. And there's the head.
We've been working at getting ready to pull the motor out, and there's 2 bolts like this that go right in the very front. It's the front motor mount right in the center. Dan has those out. We have 2 eye bolts to hook the chain to. You may not have eye bolts available. What I've done in the past is use a stud with a bigger chain and put a washer on it and just put the chain through the stud and screw into the block. But you have to have some way of securing a chain to the block. We have a cherry picker. It's in place, and we got tension on the chain. Dan has removed 2 bolts from the front of the block down behind the side rails of the tractor. And there's 2 up to the top that we have loose that have to come out. Getting yours, Dan?
Yep.
And underneath, there's a little inspection cover. It has 2 little bolts, and it's really behind the flywheel, or to the front of the flywheel, and it has to come out in order for the motor to come ahead. It's this little plate right here. Other than all the unforeseen things that we haven't checked yet, I think we're ready to pull this motor ahead, Dan, if we can. Probably has to go up a bit.
Okay, I just see the move. Let me get my pry bar in here.
Pry bar behind there, so you can slide it ahead. In order to get this motor out, it's apparent that we had to take the steering mechanism out because it interfered right here at the rear of the motor. To do that, down in behind the tractor rail, the U-joint sits there. We pulled it back so you can see it. All there is a bolt that goes through the front of the U-joint with a nut on it. When you get that bolt out, you're able to take a hold of the steering wheel and wiggle it and pull this whole shaft right back out of the way. And as far as we can see, that should be about the only obstruction now to get this motor out of here. Jack it up. It's all free. Take it up and out. That'll go up. Whenever you're clear, you're done.
go.
Okay, before we can put the engine on the engine stand, we have to take the clutch and the flywheel assembly off the end of the motor. Hert's gonna pull these bolts out and we'll get this clutch cover. Wow, it's been rubbing on them. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, they put the clutch in backwards here on this, and the inside of this is rubbed against the bolts here. So,
That could have been a problem for a long time with this tractor. It might have been driving on the bolts instead of the clutch. There's a right and wrong way of putting these clutch plates in. This is a good time to really bring it up. Your spring side of the clutch needs to go back towards the tractor, and the flat side go up against the flywheel so you don't have any obstructions in here. This is the pilot bearing that the clutch shaft runs into. It feels all good in this tractor, but that's another thing you need to inspect. You got the right socket?
right socket.
It's dubbed over. I don't know. Go on there.
When you get down to the last one, you want to make sure you hold on to this so it doesn't fall off on your toes.
They usually fit pretty tight, and sometimes there's even dowels in them, but this one comes right off.
So there, we're all ready now to install this onto the engine stand, and then we can move on to getting the oil pan off and getting the piston out of it.
Okay, we've got it on the motor stand. We attached it with 4 bolts to the motor stand here. We're taking the chain loose. Gonna be able to roll this cherry picker right out of our way. And probably the next thing we'll do is probably be taking the oil pan off, so we want to turn this motor upside down. Gotta pull that pin. And we're ready to pull this oil pan.
We're ready to take the pan off. We have all the bolts around the front off. And there's a gasket on there, so you got to kind of tap it off. The guy in here got all the bolts off. Took a screwdriver and wiggled it off. And that way we can get to where we can get to the pistons. You can see this motor's all moving. It's had an antifreeze running into the block.
Bottom of this sleeve is broken.
Yep. I don't know if you can see that from the camera there or not, but the bottom of that sleeve, there's a piece missing right out of it. We've noticed that somebody's had this motor apart before with the clutch being in backwards and stuff, and we'll try to point out all these pitfalls as we come along now.
Somebody's put this together and it's all silicone all the way around here, so we know that someone's been here before.
We're going to take the oil pump off now. There's an oil pickup tube here. We want to take one of the fittings loose on that. You can probably take either one off, but you want to get it out of your way. And then there's 2 half-inch bolts that hold the oil pump in place. Get those loose and taken out. And then hopefully they just pull right out like that.
We've rolled the engine up on an angle here to give you a better view. Normally we do this with the motor setting straight up and down. But what we're going to do is cut the ridge out of this back cylinder. And we're doing it mainly to show you how to do it, because this motor doesn't have any ridge in the top of your cylinder. But some motors that you tear apart will have a ridge, and your rings come up against it and you won't be able to get the piston out of the hole unless you cut the ridge. And you use a tool. If you don't have one, a lot of tool shops will rent them. Or this one came from Sears, it's a Craftsman. And it expands here, you put it in the hole, and I've set the piston so it's about the right height. And you shove it down there, and this top will expand that tool right out into the bore so that you're centered on the bore. And then your cutter turns on this point. Before we do that, there's a lock on the cutter right here, a little arrow shows you which way it goes, and you have to release this so it comes out to the wall. And when it's released, it's free. Turns easy. And you just crank this And we're not gonna get very much out of this one because there's not much in the ridge, but as you turn this little cutter comes up towards the top. Basically, all we're doing on this one's taking the carbon off. Not quite. A little more. There. There, we're out. Then you can take the 5/8, back this out, and you see you've actually cranked this cutter up that much on that screw. Before you do the next one, you have to run it back down. But that takes the top right out of your cylinder bore so that you can pull your piston out.
Okay, we've got the motor turned back up so you can see what we're doing. We're going to take the pistons out. Guy's taking the cap off, and this one here has a locking nut on it. Some of them might have a little lip that you have to take a hammer and a punch and pound the lock over. This has locking nuts on it. The guy pulled the cap off, and the bearing's stuck to the crank. And they're usually pretty gooey, and this one here is more so than normal. What I'm looking for on this bearing is I want to check, make sure it's standard 10, 20, 30, and it's stamped right in the bearing here. I don't know if you can see that, Herb. Right in the end cap of the bearing it says 030, so it's 30 thousandths bearing. So this crank has been turned 30 thousandths. Now I've got my hand on the bottom side to catch this. The guy gets it out to me. It's just about flush, guys. He's just pounding out with the end of the rubber hammer so he doesn't do any damage to it. One ring just popped out. 2, 3. And that's how easy it is to take it out. Make sure somebody catches it down there and out they come.
We've got our pistons out now, and we want to get ready to take the crankshaft out. To do that, we got to take the front pulley off, and then we got to take the timing cover off. Take the front pulley off. There's a bolt in here. It's got a locking nut on it. You got to back that locking nut off, and then take this bolt all the way out. This long nose on it has to come out to allow the pulley to come off, and then you got to beat on it a bit. Get that off. So once we get that off, now we can work on getting the timing cover off.
We're getting ready to take the front timing cover off. Herb and I left the distributor drive in, but we had to take the nut off the back of the stud that runs all the way through. And there's an oil tube that comes up that feeds oil to this governor. So we took the little line off the governor tube there. Herb just took that off. We have all the bolts off. We're going to try to wiggle it off. We'll try to take it straight off. And there's the whole timing cover with the governor intact, and we left it right on the cover.
Before going any further, I wanted to note and see if there are timing marks on your cam gear and on your crank gear. There were marks here. We highlighted them with a paint pencil and see how they line up. You don't need to know this information to get it apart, but when you start putting your engine together in order to have it in time, you need to know where your timing marks are. We also noted that when these are lined up, your front throw of the crank is straight up and down, so that your first piston would be all the way to the top, and there's a hole through the crank that locks the front pulley on, and that's also straight up and down. So these are just reference marks that you want to note while you're taking the motor apart so you know how to put it back together. This motor has shims under the main bearing caps. I found that a bit unusual. I'm not familiar with that, but according to the book, they belong there, and they're to make a fine adjustment on your main bearing clearance, and they're on the late WD and the WD-45 has shims under here. We're going to pull this cap off and show you just what they look like. And they're made to fit under here in such a way that they do not cover up the main bearing insert. They only go between the block and the cap, so that you don't get it in between the insert.
Taking all the main caps off now. Now we got them off, you can reach in here and grab onto it, give it a little wiggle. You can take the crankshaft right out of the tractor.
We're going to try to pull a sleeve out of here, or actually drive a sleeve out with this. But to start, you need some sort of puller so you can pound on the sleeve and not actually pound on the edge of the sleeve. And what we did is we took and made one out of some well casing and some other pieces we had and put it in a lathe and milled it around so it just fits inside the sleeve and has a ledge around it that will push on the outer edge. Now either you can make something or you can go to a parts place and probably a machine shop and rent one, a sleeve puller.
Here's the edge that Herb's talking about. We just made a shelf so it grabs the sleeve as he drives in.
But get in there and make sure it sets in there, and then we're using a good sized block here, and hopefully we'll just pound on this and it'll drive right out. It's moving already. And there we go.
O-rings on the sleeve, so they kind of come out kind of hard. Now this tractor has had a broken sleeve. Here's the O-rings that typically leak, and we figured that's what's wrong with this tractor here, is we have leaking sleeves, a very common problem with the Chalmers tractor. There's an O-ring.
We're getting ready to install the sleeves in this block, and the thing that I want you to know is the preparation for putting the sleeve in is very important. I found that a plain old wood chisel works very well for getting into this counterbore and cleaning the counterbore really good, so at the top of the sleeve sits down in there. You can't have any dirt in there. The second thing you got to do is the bottom surface down here where the O-rings go. You have to make sure that surface is clean and ready to have these O-rings go in. And what we try to scrape it out and get it as clean as we can, but we use a hone. And when this hone goes in, there's a bit of a lead that these go in. So I try to hold it in the hole to where the stones are a bit of at an angle like this, so that you can clean the lead for the O-rings to go into. And seeing that there's no sleeve in the block, you kind of have to work the hone down through to get it in place. You ready? It's about right. Yeah. The same thing when you go to take it out. You got to work these hones out, the stones on the hone out, to get it out through the hole. After you do that, I like to take something and clean this hole. So that this sleeve will be all ready to go in here, and it'll be clean, and you won't have any dirt or anything cutting the O-rings as they go in. You can probably put whatever you have on these O-rings, but you should prepare them, and we like to put some silicone on them. It works as a lubricant and a sealer. Probably can wipe that around.
Yeah.
No, that's in.
Okay.
Good. Just like that.
We've got all the sleeves in, and just something we wanted to go back over about this is if by chance the sleeves start go in and then they kind of hang up a little bit and they look like they went in pretty good so far, you can put your puller that you had and just maybe hit them gently to drive them in the rest of the way. So But just always be careful as they're going in to be conscious of you don't want to pinch that O-ring. So if it looks like it's going in fairly smooth and maybe just needs a little extra help towards the end, you can use your puller and something across there and nice firm taps on there and seat them in all the way. Just to make sure they're seated real well. So that's what you want to do, make sure they're all in good. And as we show you here, we got them all in. What we're going to do now is we're going to hone the cylinders too now. We're going to do this at this point because we don't have the crank in, we don't have to worry about hitting the crank with the hone as we're doing it. And so we're going to hone them now. If you're haven't took the crank out, you want to make sure as you do hone, you don't have the journals away from the hone at the bottom so you don't hit the stones on that. So we got our hone here, we're going to put it in here, put some lubrication in it. And hone with a good up and down pattern so you get a nice cross hatch. And if you have a reversible drill, just before you finish, it'd be good to reverse the motor and go the opposite direction. It'll give a nice breaking up of the blade. After you've honed a while, take a rag and wipe it out good and see how it looks. See if you broke the glaze well. And that's all you're looking to do is get the glaze broke and a nice crosshatch pattern in the scratching of the cylinder walls. So you go ahead and do that on all 4 cylinders now and get that done and out of the way and you'll be ready to move on to the next step. We're getting ready to put the crank in, and something we want to talk about that we haven't talked about before yet is this block. We've power washed this block to get the old oil out and the sludge off of it to clean it up. Before you do this much work on it and you start putting it back together, you want to clean things up good, clean all your parts up that you're going to reuse, and clean the block good. Either power wash it, send it away to have it hot tanked, or whatever you want to do to get it clean to your standards. But you want to clean it up, get that old oil and sludge out of it before you go any farther. So now we're going to go ahead and get ready to put the crank in, and we've got our bearings in here, we've set them in, and you want to make sure these little notches line up with the notches on the block and the bearing caps. On each bearing they have a little notch. You want to make sure that lines up with the notch both on the bearing caps and on the block. So you get those in there and line those up. Just make sure they're set in there and even. Then on the front one here, this is the thrust bearing. It has sides to it, so that one will go on a little harder. Make sure that goes there. The other 2 bearings are the same. On the back here, we have an oil seal. Half of it goes down in here, and the other half goes in the cap. And this is a felt seal with like a nylon center thing in it to give it rigidity. This is a little troublesome to put on, and it's felt, and it's dry when you get it, so you want to lube it up with some oil or WD-40 or something like that. Get it worked in there, and then what we did to get it really set in there good is we took the cap and we set it over top of the crank where it goes, and then we just tapped on this lightly, and that set that felt all the way down in there, so it sets in there good. And then you have to trim the edges off so that it doesn't stick out too far. They always give you a little bit extra, so you need to cut the edges off. Make sure you don't cut it too short, because that's going to give it the force to keep the oil from leaking out on this rear main seal. So and then we set the crank in here temporarily and pounded it down, tapped it down to seat this back seal. So that you want to make sure you get this oil seal in and get it set in there good and trimmed off, which we've done. And now we're going to put the crank in, and before you set the crank in, you want to put some lubrication on your bearings. The guy's going to talk about that.
Well, we just use regular motor oil, a 30 weight, probably a non-detergent, and you can have it in a can and just wipe it into your bearings. Put it on the seal also, so that you got a little lubrication on that seal to start out with, so it's not dry. Do the same in the engine block, on the bearings. You want to use probably 30 weight oil or something a bit heavy, so it'll lay in there. and hold the lubrication on the bearing until the oil pump picks up the oil and starts pumping oil through the motor.
I'm going to set the crankshaft in, so I'm going to grab onto it and I'm going to put it right in the engine. Remember, we had to do the timing mark thing. When we took this motor apart, we had highlighted our marks.
That screw's got to be up.
Turn the key in a little bit.
There you go.
Okay, we'll roll it around here and show you what we have it lined up. We highlighted the timing marks with a paint pencil. There's the bottom mark on the cam and the mark on the crankshaft. So when they come together, this one had lines. Yours might have dots punched in it. This one had little hash marks. Now that we got that in the right spot, we're going to put the caps on. Guys, loop the crank again. On top of the crankshaft, the bearing caps are torqued at 80 pounds of torque. So we've got our torque crank set at 80 pounds of torque. As soon as we get all the caps on,
Want to make sure the notch goes to the notch, so if they're both the same side.
also, we're not putting the bushings back under the crank like we showed you when we took it apart. We measured the crankshaft, and the bushings are there for adjustment. Shims are under there. We took them out. We're not going to put them in. When we get this all done, we'll roll it over and show you that it's fine without them. So again, we took all the shims out, and we're not putting any of them back in. Okay, we just snug them all up first. You don't go get your 80 pounds of torque until you get them all on. Now, this is going to turn a little hard because it's got a felt seal in the rear of the engine that's going to be fairly tight. Okay, I got them all snug. I'm ready to torque them all down. You can hear the wrench snap when you hit the 80-pound mark. Now your tractor might have wire on, or they might have them tabs that bend over. So this is a late WD-45 tractor, and they don't. Once I get them all torqued, I'll go back over them all again, make sure they got them all at 80 pounds. Make sure the wrench snaps. Just go over them one time. And the guy in here will turn the crankshaft to make sure it's tight.
It's tight.
And it's real tight. So, we'll have to redo that.
Well, we may have to put some shims in.
Yep. I'm going to take it all back down.
Wait a minute, just loosen this one, see if it's a seal. We had a little problem with this crank. It was tight when we put it together, and we had to figure what the problem was. And so we loosened up the main bearing caps and rolled it, and we tightened down the front main, and it was all right. We went on to the second one and tightened that down, it was all right. But when we tightened this rear main, the crank would lock right up. And so we took that cap off and inspected it, put it back on. It would still lock up. So we took this cap off and took the main bearing insert out and put it together with no bearing in it. And we still nearly locked this crank right up. So we determined that the seal on the rear main was what was being tight on this crank. So we took that off and re-inspected it, and where we trimmed the end of the excess material was a little long. We had to trim a little more off than that, and we laid it on there again and wrapped this main bearing cap down on the crank without the bearing in it. Then we took it back apart, put the insert in it, torqued it down, and this is what we have now. And when this crank goes together, you shouldn't have any more bind than that on it. And we stopped. We knew we had a problem. And don't be wrenching cranks over. If they bind, you're going to have to go back and put shims in, or you're going to have to do one bearing at a time. Find out where your problem is. And we found it was just the rear main seal, and we're ready to proceed with this and go to the next step.
We're going to show you how to put rings on the pistons here. And you always start with the bottom ring. And the bottom ring here is an oil ring. So this one has 4 rings total on it. It has 3 compression rings and an oil ring. So the bottom ring is the oil ring, and this particular oil ring has 4 parts to it. They have all different types of oil rings. Some of them may only have 3 parts. Some of them may only come as a 1-part oil ring. But this one has 4 parts. It has an expander part here. We'll put that in the bottom here. And then you always want to stagger the gaps on wherever these gaps are. So we kind of make track of the gap for that one was here. Now this scraper type or expander type ring here has different colors at the ends, a blue and orange. And you can easily get these overlapped when you lay it in there. So you always want to make sure that you see the ends right so it doesn't overlap. So we'll put that in here and make sure it's on a different spot and get that in there so where the ends are not overlapped. Okay. Now these are the rails, and this particular one uses 2 rails. One of these rails has got to go all the way to the bottom of it, and the other one will go on top of that. And these are about the easiest thing to do is do them by hand. And you just start them one end in there on the bottom side of it, and they're fairly flexible. You don't have to worry about breaking these generally, and they're spring steel, and you get in there and it will snap in place. But just make sure it's on the bottom all the way around, because that was the bottom one. Now we're going to do the top one, and again we want to stagger this gap, and we don't want it in with that gap, so we'll start it over here. Get it in there. And what works good a lot of times, we're doing this here on these bolts holding it, the piston up here, but a lot of times the vise, put the rod in a vise and to hold it steady, and then you do it. But after you get in there, just make sure it looks okay. You should be able to turn the ring around in there so that it spins on that and adjust that, okay? So we got our oil ring in.
Now the third groove, now we're starting our compression rings. And the way that these ones here came, these are unique. Herb and I noticed the box has 3rd groove, and then the lid tells you your 2nd groove and your top ring. When we took the rings out, we're looking for them. Usually we're looking for a dot. We're looking for some kind of way of determining which way's the top and which way's the bottom. These ones have the word top stamped right into the top of the ring. So with the word top, we know that's our top ring. I'm using a piston ring expander. They just go right in there and they squeeze it right out. And it just squeezes the ring right past the piston. You drop it down to the groove, let off on it, and you're in. And we put the word top to the very top, and that was the 3rd groove. And we'll take our other one, find the word top. We're looking for the word top. There it is. It's right in the ring. The 2nd and 3rd ring are the same piston ring, and the different one here is the very first, number 1 groove. It's chrome on the edge, and it says top on it too. There it is.
Now we're going to show you something different on this one. These ring expanders kind of work the best. They keep you from breaking them, but we've done it too a different way. A lot of times you can just put your thumbs on the ends of the rings and expand them slowly and just lower them over top of the piston and get them in place and let up on them. And if you're careful, you can do that. If you don't have a ring expander, you can do it by that method, by just grabbing it by your thumbs, giving a little bit of pressure out, and you can even take them off that way if they're good, and just expand it out. Don't put too much pressure on it so you break them, and just lower them right over the top. And then get them on there, make sure they're in the grooves right, and they spin around okay, and you're all set now to put our ring compressor on there and get them put in the cylinder.
We're also going to check our grooves here when we put them together that they're staggered. One will be here, and I turn the other ring here, and the other one's over here. So we've got all of our grooves away from one another. Once we get that done, Herb's got the piston ring expander here, all ready to go on. We're going to lube them up really well. We're going to use the same oil that we used on the crankshaft. It's a 30-weight, non-detergent motor oil. It's a nice heavy oil, so it sticks on the rings and until the motor gets started and running.
And it's good to spin the rings around, get some oil in those grooves so that have some lubrication while you're assembling this engine. Otherwise, they can seize up and won't be good. At this time too, we're going to put some oil down in the cylinder so that it's lubricated so that it's not running down in a dry cylinder wall and could cause it to bind up and wear excessively when you first start it up. Because it might take you a while, you might get into some other problems along the way, so you want to have this lubricated so it doesn't sit there dry while you're finished putting it all together.
We've got the piston ring all lubed up, they're tightened down, ready to pop in the hole. But before we do, we got to determine which way we're going to put them in. And on the rod, they have a nut that tightens down on the wrist pin, that tightens the rod down. That nut faces, so when it goes in the hole, that nut faces the camshaft, which is along here. Also, the numbers on the rod and on the cap face the camshaft. So when I put it down the hole, I want to make sure I'm looking at the numbers on the camshaft side.
Good. Also, before we put it in, we want to put the upper rod bearing in the rod. And again, these rod bearings, they have a tab on them. You want to line that tab up with the notch that's in the rod and make sure that's in there and that the rod is clean. And then you want to lube up, again, we're using this 30 weight non-detergent oil, lube up that bearing so that it's not dry when you put it in there. So you want to lube this bearing up too before we put this down in there. So now we're ready to put this rod back in the engine.
Okay, I'm looking at the numbers on the cap.
And also, when you're doing this, make sure that your crank is the throws all the way back so it's the farthest out of the way. And just lightly tap down on it, holding the ring compressor tight against the top of the engine. And you'll slide right in there. And now we'll just push it down until it butts up against the crank.
Hold on. A little more. One more. You're there.
Okay, so now we got it down there against the crank.
And we're going to turn it around so you can actually see what we're doing on the bottom side of the engine. Now we've got the rod down against the crankshaft, and we have to put the cap on it. And again, the tab on the cap on the rod bearing has a tab just like the other one. And so you're going to put tab to tab when you put them together. You'll look up there and you'll see the tab, and you want tab to tab. Also, they should be number to number. So there's two things to look at to make sure you're putting the caps on the right way, because they can get put on backwards.
These bolts happen to come out really easy on the rod, so we took the bolts out before we put the rod in, and now we're just putting them back in. They have flat spots so they line up. We make sure we lube up that bearing cap again before we put that on. So again, we want to make sure this is lubed up well while it's assembling so that way it isn't put together dry. Gives you less chance of things binding up. Get this started.
According to the book, and Herb and I, we're using the implement and tractor manual along with us. When we work on engines, we always have a manual with us. And they recommend that the caps be torqued. These are self-locking nuts. And they recommend that they be torqued at 40 pounds of torque. If it has cotter keys, they're recommending 70. This one has self-locking nuts. So we're going to use a torque wrench, and we're going to set the wrench at 40 pounds of torque. Okay, we're setting the torque on the cap. This particular one, a WD-45, has self-locking nuts. And the manual Herb and I are using said torque them at 40 pounds of torque. So you can hear the wrench snapping. We've set them at 40 pounds. Now, it says in the book that the early model ones with the cotter keys are 70 pounds of torque, and then put the cotter key in. So if your tractor has a cotter key, read the manual and set them at the right torque according to the manual.
And again, as you put this back together, as you put each piston in and you get them torqued down, you want to turn it over. Make sure that that bearing didn't seize up. And this, again, turns over, has about the same amount of resistance as it did before. And that's what you want to make sure that you're not increasing the resistance as you're putting this together. Make sure the thing still goes together right as you go so you don't have a problem when you get done.
We're going to put the oil pump in the bottom of the engine. We have all the pistons in, and again, like Herb and I said, we rolled it over, made sure that it wasn't tight. We have our bolts torqued. We made sure that the numbers on the caps are all facing the cam side of the engine, and we have the torque set according to the book. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the oil pump in while we have the motor turned upside down. The oil pump on a WD is quite heavy. We didn't take this one apart. The tractor had great oil pressure prior to taking it apart. If you have to take it apart, it's got a screw face on here and there's a gear in there. Now, you can't buy a kit. I checked when I was at the dealer. You have to buy each part separately. So it's not a real common thing to rebuild these pumps. Not like a Ford tractor where every time you rebuild the motor, you have to rebuild the pump. Herb's just sliding it in, and it goes into the camshaft. So you gotta make sure you get the gear lined up there. You actually might have to roll the engine just a little bit to get it to drop in. There it goes, sir. There. We rolled the motor just a bit, and it dropped in place. You gotta make sure you get it in there. You don't take a hammer and drive it in.
Yeah, I want to make sure this oil pickup tube or discharge tube from it lines up and gets that on, and then you got the 2 bolts that hold it down. And just
Herb's got his started, and then I can go ahead and tighten mine down. It drops in the gear on into the drive, runs off the camshaft, so you have to get it lined up with the camshaft. That's why we turned it. You want to make sure that you don't force it in and then get them snugged up. Herb's got his line snug. We're going to put the front timing cover on the front of the engine. We put a new gasket on here and we stuck it to the crankcase of the tractor, and in the front of the timing cover is your front seal for the crankshaft. We got a new one and I got it started. I get a socket that's about the same size as the seal, set it on there. And it works better to lay it down on a flat surface, but for the camera purposes here, we're going to do it up in the air. You just want to drive it in flush. And I think we're just about there. Now we'll turn it around and look on the inside and make sure that we're all the way in. And we are. You can feel it in there. I think it needs to go just a little more here in the front cover, right there on that side right there. There. Now it's all the way down. Now we got that. We got our gasket on, so we're ready to put it on. You have to put this on before you put the oil pan on, because part of the oil pan sits on this. Gotta go. You need to let you go on first.
yeah. You need to work this O-ring, get it start, or the seal, get that started on the crankshaft, kind of first, and then line up your bolts. And then work it on gradually. But that one stud that was sticking out, that makes it a little different. Bit of a challenge to get in place. And then get all your bolts put in. Remember, there's a long bolt that went all the way through besides that stud. You have to get that in there and tighten down. We're getting ready to put the oil pan on, and we've cleaned the oil pan all up. And of course, you're doing all this work on the engine, you want to make sure you clean your parts. We've cleaned the oil pan up, cleaned off the old gasket surface area, and got this ready to go. There is a big nodule in the back to kind of show you this goes to the back of the engine, and this part goes to the front. And then, same way on the block, we made sure the surface was cleaned off to put the gasket on. We put some kind of like contact type cement stuff on here to hold the gasket in place. And this has 4 pieces to the gasket. It's a top and a bottom here on the sides. And then it has these this cork strip that goes over the bearing cap ends on the front and rear of that. And we found that they were a little bit long, and so we trimmed them down to the right size so they fit around there real good. And then we put a little bit of silicone at the corners, just at the ends of that, just to make sure that those corners, the ends of those strips, seal up. And we got those in position, and we're going to just set the oil pan down in here. And that piece right there, that's our big concern, to make sure that fits in there and seats down. And how's it look back there? Okay. And then just get your bolts and get them started in there. Get the pan lined up with the holes. And Get a few tightened down, hold it in place, and then you can just work around and get them all tightened up. You want to be careful, these aren't real big bolts. You don't want to put a lot of torque on them. You just want to bring them up snug and tighten them down a little bit. You don't want to have any of these break off. And take your time, put them all in there, and it'll seal up good for you. We're going to put the pulley on here in front. We feel that it's a good time to put this back on. On the crank here, the hole goes all the way through, but one side has got a chamfer in it. So this bolt will fit right in there good. So we want to make sure that's the side we're lining up the hole on. You line the hole up there and tap it on in place. And it goes on pretty snug. So there we go. Got that lined up. Then get your bolt in there and tighten it down, and then make sure you tighten that locking bolt up.
Before you flip the motor over, it's easier now to go ahead and tighten your drain plug in your pan. Make sure that that's tight. It's easier to do everything here on the bottom while the motor is upside down before we flip it over. Then we'll get that bolt tight, and then we'll be ready to flip it up.
It has 4 bolt holes, and there's 4 in the crank, and they're unequally spaced. You can only put it on one way. And the best way is just trial and error. Get them lined up right. And what I usually do is use a large Phillips screwdriver to hold this, and put it in one of the holes, and you can just kind of slide the flywheel right down the shaft of the screwdriver. Get it started on the flange of the crank. Line up a bolt. Does it start?
Yep, that one started.
Okay. Just go ahead and zap them in with the air wrench. Okay, we're ready for the clutch plate. And you want to remember, when we tore this tractor apart, they had it in the wrong way. They had this spring section against the flywheel, and it had rubbed on these bolts. You want to make sure you put the flat side of the clutch towards the flywheel. We got a little clutch alignment tool there. It'll go right into the pilot bearing. Line this up, and we're ready for the cover. I'll hold this up and get the cover on.
In the pilot.
Yes, and now this might be too big for these screws. Gotta roll towards me a little counterclockwise.
The flywheel and the clutch and the pressure plate are all on the motor, ready to go. Before we put it in the tractor, we want to check the throwout bearing. And the throwout bearing is right back here, and actually grab right onto it and wiggle it. Make sure there's no slop in it at all, and it's not wore bad. And this one's a real nice shape, so we're not going to change it. If yours is worn, it's sloppy, put a new one in. You'll be glad you did it at this point, rather than waiting down the road here and then decide you have to have a new throwout bearing after you put the motor in. So we decided this one's okay. We're going to go ahead and put the motor in now. Alright, when we bring the motor in, we're using a cherry picker, put it in the tractor.
Give your side number. That's pretty good.
Alright, it's great to have this many hands to do it with. Gotta go down now. When you're lowering this down, you always want to be careful to have your hands away from any pinch points. So there's a lot of them here when you're lowering this motor in. What Herb and I are going to try to do is get the input shaft started. And go down just a little more, I'm free here. We're going to try to get the input shaft into the center of the engine. There you go, down a little more.
You're up on hydraulic.
Whoop, now you got to go up. It's kind of tricky because there's a cross member here on the back of the oil pan that we're working around. And we're trying to get, we're close, guy, right there. Okay. You can't hear?
Your motor's got too much of road in the chain.
Okay. We can, got Herb and I can move it. There it goes. That felt it go in. Okay. Now, we're
Go
gonna
down a
go.
little bit.
Okay.
The front motor's too high.
Yep, the front motor's too high. I'd say go ahead and let it down a little, and we'll adjust it on the chain. Feels like we're in on the shaft here.
And you're setting on the front pulley.
Okay.
You can move the chain so the motor's level.
Okay. There it goes. There it goes. There it goes.
There, you got it over.
Okay, now we need to go down just a little bit.
Yep. It's a wiggling process. You just have to keep wiggling it in here till you get it to go into the right place. Herb and I are constantly turning it and wiggling it. I think we're where we want to be. Now Herb's going to run around to the back of the tractor. We've kicked the tractor in neutral. We put the PTO in here. There it goes, Herb. And Herb's turning the PTO shaft. And as Herb turns the PTO,
I think it's close right there.
Yeah,
We gotta
we're
go stick the dowels right now.
I'm against the dowel now.
See if you come up a little bit or not.
Down a little, I think.
Yeah, down a little high too. Okay, that's good. I'm against dowel. Okay, let me start my bolt. No, that's not behind it. I gotta come this way. There. You got your started? Yeah. Okay.
We're ready to put this little inspection cover on up here to the rear of the motor. And Dan's down here on the other side, he's gonna get that bolt started.
I got it. Go ahead.
Got it?
Yep.
And we've already put the steering shaft in. There's no way to show you, but the U-joint goes back in and there's one bolt that goes through that connects the steering shaft to the front wheels. And this one bolt right here has to go in to support the steering shaft. We've already got that in. We're just getting ready to put the head on the tractor. And I always like to put something onto the head gasket. We use this copper coat spray. I just lay it out and spray the head gasket a little bit ahead of time so we have it coated, make a gasket sealer on it. I try to do that, just a few minutes before you get ready to put the head on so this stuff really becomes tacky. And I spray both sides. Just turn it over. And it comes with a spray can and just spray it on like some paint. And it'll make that whole head gasket just seal right up.
We're going to put the head on the tractor now. We looked this head over and we feel this head is okay. We took this head off, we cleaned it up. We're going to put it back on the tractor. We don't feel like it's been off that long and we're just going to put it back on. If you feel your head is bad, take it to a machine shop, have them do a valve job on it, and then you'll be ready to go also. So we're going to show you how to put it back on and torque the head bolts. This has got studs sticking out of it where the water manifold comes through the head. So you have to get them lined up and they go on. There's long head bolts and short head bolts. The long head bolts go out here on the outside. The short ones, there's 3 short ones that go on the inside. So you gotta make sure you get the right ones in the right hole. You need 2 long ones. And there's a little plate on the back. The guy's putting 2 bolts in right now. So he's putting those ones on. The big bolts, according to the manual, we're going to torque them at 70 pounds of torque. The small ones that Herb has up here in the front, there's 3 of them, are torqued at 25 pounds of torque. So we're going to torque all the head bolts down.
This water outlet here that goes on top, there's 2 nuts that hold that down. You want to make sure you have this long front bolt in first before you put that water jacket on, or else you're going to have problems getting that bolt in. So plan ahead and get that on, and then you won't have a problem later and have to take something back apart.
We're going to run them all down just with a regular ratchet wrench. Then when we get them all down snug, we'll take the torque wrench and we'll go to torquing them. Torque them all. Start in the center when you torque. Work your way out. Don't start at the end and torque these down. Start in the center. And then go over them all repeatedly to make sure you have them all, because sometimes when you torque the center down, you work your way to the outside. It also snugs up the center. So start from the center, work your way out.
We're gonna put the rocker arm assembly on, but first I was gonna show you, we've just dropped all the push rods in, and you kinda have to feel and get them to drop right in the right place. And then you can drop the rocker arms on. Takes 4 fine threaded nuts to hold these down. You need some way.
this under.
Okay, gotta put that under.
Little cover, splash cover here.
This one here, I think is made a little different around the end.
We're putting that on backwards too.
Yeah, that looks better.
Okay.
Get a couple for you. Or get a wrench to run them down.
There you go. We're gonna set the valves at 14 thousandths on the intake and the exhaust. It says 12 hot, so we're gonna give ourselves a little room seeing they're cold. The book doesn't give you a cold setting, but we're gonna go ahead and make them all 12. That's what we're gonna set them at.
We also had to hook this little oil line that feeds the rocker arms up when we put the head on. We've had that. And then there's a little line that runs into the rocker arm shaft. You might have to roll it. No, it's there. Gotta just find a hole. And put this line in. I have a little sequence as to how I set these valves. If you think about this engine, number 1 piston and number 4 piston came up and down together. And so if you jog the motor over, so if these 2 valves right here, we're going to do this on the starter, this would be the exhaust and this would be the intake. That intake just closed. The exhaust is opening, so your piston is coming up when your exhaust valve is open. When it gets near the top, your intake will start to open. Right there. When you're in that position, you know number 1 is on the firing position, so you're in the right position to set these valves on number 1 cylinder.
I'll check the gauge. Oh, too tight. Loosen it up. Right there.
Just all right?
Yep.
All right?
Yep.
Good.
That's just perfect. That one's a little tight. Yep. Look, tighten it up right there. Lock it down.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. Now we do the same thing for number 4. We got to roll this down. That's your exhaust. Your intake's going to just start to open right there, so you know this one's in firing position. And you can set those.
It's got to be tightened down. Right there.
How's that?
A little tight.
How's that?
Perfect. This one's tight. Too tight. Okay. Tighten it down just a little bit. Right there. Lock it down.
How's that?
Right on.
Now your center 2 cylinders go up and down together. This here would be your exhaust valve on number 2, and I can see it's already open, so we're going to wire that. Now this one's going to start to open. Now you're ready to do number 3. That one's tight.
It's tight on the valve also. Right there. A little bit loose. Just a little looser. Right there.
Still all right?
Yep. Just right on the money. That one just needs to be just a tad bit snugger, just a little bit. And we'll be there. Right there. Okay, we can live with that.
All right?
Yep, tighten her down. Right. Our last one, right here.
So we got right there. We're ready to do this one.
It's real tight. A little more. All right, tighten it up right there. We're gonna leave it at that.
How's that?
Right on the money. This one's real tight again also. A little less, right there. Okay, tighten it up, right there.
A little tighter?
Yep, no, that's fine right there.
How's that?
Perfect. We want to run around to the other side and show you exactly what I was doing on this side while a guy was adjusting them down. We're going to go ahead and roll the motor over. You can see the exhaust valve, there goes the intake. So now we're ready to set the back one. What I was doing is I have a 14 thousandths feeler gauge here, and Guy was adjusting them.
I'll back it off so we can.
All right, it's real loose right now, and Guy turns the screwdriver. There, it's too tight. Right there, it's just right. So Guy tightens them down, and then I make sure that that just fits in there to where it just touches, and it's right. All right, this one's too loose. Oh, too tight. Back up. Right there. And then Guy locks them down while I hold it in place, and then I check it again before he's done, and it's just touching, just touching. And that's what I was doing on this side.
We're gonna put this water pump on the front of the tractor now, and we put a gasket cement on here and on the water pump, and we have to enter this little hose connection up here, and just start them bolts in. Is it up high enough?
I think this one started.
Get it started.
Tips your waist.
There, this one's going.
And then just tighten her up and make sure you get your hose clamp tight. Also remember to think about if you needed to replace this hose, now's the time to do it. And just tighten her down.
The bottom bolt down here we've left to last, you can't get a socket on it, and you have to take that one in with a wrench. I'm going to set this distributor in and put it in time and show you how to time it. But I wanted to show you first that when it's set in, number 1 wants to be pointed right straight towards the front of the tractor. This is number 1 wire going over here. So to time number 1, again I go back to the valves and I jog this around. This the exhaust just closing. Intake's just starting to open, so I know number 1 is right up in firing position. So I have to look and see where the rotor's pointing. I don't know how we drop that in, but it's just about right. Right there. You can take this out, jog this any place. But when it goes down in, you want this rotor to be pointing as near as you can get it. Right straight ahead, just like that. And then, all you have to do is put your clamp bolts in here, clamp it down, and it's in time.
We're going to put the valve cover on, and we've got a new gasket here that we've got. We'll put on. We put some contact type cement for gaskets here on this to keep it in place. Sometimes these are bowed and they don't hold together well. So then we'll get the valve cover. We've cleaned it up, cleaned all the oil out of it, and put that on there. And then there's little O-rings and nuts that go on here. We'll have to get those O-rings. I don't have those right now, but put those on. And then we also hooked up the wires to the distributor and the coil. We did that. And we also hooked up the governor linkage, throttle linkage here, and put that in and tightened down the nut, put the cotter pin in. Now that we've got the distributor in place too, and the timing all done, we can go ahead and put our plugs in. So we're going to do that, put the plugs in. And also, we've already added oil in this. Before we started doing the timing, we went ahead and put 5 quarts of new oil in it and a new filter on it. So that way, as we cranked it over for that, it would work on getting pulled up into the pump and back up into the engine. So we did that too. So right now, we're going to just go ahead and put these plugs in, and we'll get the washers for this and tighten that down and start to cover this up. We're gonna put the manifold on now, and it's got these little round gaskets that go on each one of the intakes and exhaust ports. So you want to make sure those are on there. Maybe put a little stick them on there. They seem to want to fall off easy enough, so getting these lined up on the studs and keeping them from falling off could be a challenge. So you get up there. Okay.
Once you get it up there, then you can start some bolts and hold it right into place. I love our tractor manifolds like that, the little rings on it like that.
So then I'm going to tighten this down, get all these bolts in here, and then Dan's going to work on putting the carburetor on as soon as we get this snugged up a little bit here.
I have the carburetor ready to go as soon as we can get our hands free. The gasket's up under here, and just 2 bolts hold the carburetor on. I'll just put one on it for now. Got the other one. And once we get the carburetor on, then we're ready to hook up the gas line and all the linkages that go to the carburetor. There's a choke cable in the back and the throttle linkage that has to be hooked up. The cotter keys had a piece of wire in them that held them on. We're going to go ahead and put new cotter keys in. Make sure the linkages, when you put them on, are free from being binding or something. When you pull the choke, it should pull easily. And same with the throttle linkage, it should work freely. There shouldn't be any bind on them. Herb and I are going to continue on tightening these down. We're going to tighten them down slowly so that we don't pull it crooked onto the head. We're going to tighten this one a little bit and get them all snug down, all in a sequence. We'll do that right now.
And also, while we're over here, this is where you drain the block, water. You might have drained your block of water. You're going to be getting the radiator on pretty soon, like you put the water pump on. You want to make sure this petcock's closed. When you forget about it, you end up having water pouring out when you start filling the radiator later. So while you're over here, or sometime during there, remember to close this petcock so you don't drain the water out on the floor as you start filling it back up.
Okay, we're getting closer now. We've put the oil bath air cleaner back on this side. There's 4 bolts around back that hold that on. We put the gas line back on. We put the generator on. The fan belt's on the generator. The voltage regulator's back on. So this side is all caught up. Now, we need to put the radiator on. And the radiator just has 2 bolts, one in this hole, one over here. The big trick is to get the lower and upper radiator hose on. The lower radiator hose is in a real tough to get to place. It's on?
Yep.
I gotta back up a little bit at the top here. And the top's on. Okay.
That is, get the bolts lined up now.
Now we gotta just line the bolts up in the bottom. Where's that long punch? We're using a long extension with a swivel socket on the end to reach all the way up there to get to it. Just get started. Get started.
Tighten them down and tighten up the clamps and put your antifreeze back in. We got the hood on, and so we've kind of finished everything up. We put the hood on, got the muffler on, put all the breather cover on, got everything kind of finished up, bolted down, tightened down, and we've started it and did some preliminary adjustments on it. And just something to talk to you about right now is that when you get it started up, you want to adjust your distributor. We course set the distributor when we put it in to make sure that it was lined up to number 1 cylinder. But what you do is once it's running, you loosen up the bolts, hold down the distributor, and turn it until it just labors, and then back it off till it just sounds good, and it should be set about right there. And that's what we've done, and now it should start up, and we're going to show you that it starts up now. It starts up good and it runs good, sounds good, the tablets are quiet, and all of it sounds pretty good right now. If you have problems and it doesn't start good, You need to look into various things about the carburation and the points and different things like that to make sure everything's okay.
I hope this video on the engine rebuild was helpful to you on your Allis-Chalmers tractor. We also have a video on the tune-up of this tractor. We go through step by step on the carburetor, the distributor, the points, how to get it to start and start properly. We'll also change the oil and filter, adjust the brakes, all that kind of stuff is covered on the tune-up video. So if you'd like a copy of that, write to us at the address on the video or at the end of this tape. A great big thanks to my father-in-law Guy and my favorite brother-in-law Herb for helping me with this video. Thank you.